your company has to have a clinical right to exist in healthcare. And I think the beauty of being profitable but having a clinical right to exist is that we're at the perfect intersection of margin and mission. That's part of why I love this company, and we'll continue to want to grow and make this into this special place, because the more members we connect to care, the better we do financially.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another fabulous episode of the Healthcare Trailblazers podcast. I am excited to be sitting with Shana Hoffman over from Lucet. It's a platform that really connects patient care around behavioral health, helping patients get better access, easier access in a space that is really difficult for a lot of patients. And the actual demographic of patients are patients that can really use the extra love. And so really a tremendous space to be in. Shana, thank you so much for sitting with us today.
Thanks so much, Mendel, for having me.
So you are quite fast, and you've got a number of stops along your journey, which seems to be just getting started. So why don't you take us a little step back and talk about why you chose healthcare and what kind of your first couple experiences were?
Sure. So I'm an engineer by background. People make fun of me. I'm the person at the checkout line that's deciding between the express lane and the regular based on number of agents, the number of things people have in their cart. But then really kind of made my way into the healthcare space. Sort of by accident, started in it at DaVita. So was in their corporate strategy group for a couple of years, the large dialysis services player. In many ways, you get such broad-based exposure in sort of a company of that size and scale, and touching so many different kind of segments of the population, if you will, through their work. And so started my career there, but then actually went back to the East Coast for business school, where I really wanted to advance my career in the healthcare space. I had been kind of a caregiver for family caregiver for my dad had significant medical problems, and so I sort of experienced sort of how challenging it is to weave together all the different components of family caregiving. And so I actually went to business school. I'm sort of a risk averse, as I mentioned, engineer, wanted to start a company, but wanted to do it in the protection of a 2-year business school program. And so I linked up with a classmate of mine who had experience in the senior care space. And together we actually built a platform for family caregivers of seniors, managing, coordinating care. And the idea was that majority of care is provided out in the community by family caregivers. If you can help raise their level of proficiency, that's going to benefit the caregiver, certainly the patient, and then also the system. And so this was sort of informed my, idea that if you do want to build something substantive in healthcare, it's more helpful to try to sell to payer, provider, sort of the enterprise, versus sort of going direct to the user. And so we built that, launched a platform, won some competitions in business school, I think had some delusions of grandeur, and then decided we didn't want to pursue that full time after business school. I came over to a company called Kairos that was doing patient provider matching, actually on the medical side. So a lot of parallels to what, we're now doing on the behavioral health side, and actually ran their sales team there. I think everyone should do a stint in sales just so we can appreciate how challenging it is if you decide to go the enterprise healthcare route and sell to enterprises in healthcare, very long sales cycles, as you know. From there, I decided that sort of that early stage company provided a lot of things I loved, but there were other things that I felt like I was sort of missing out on. And so went over to a company called Beacon Health Options, got back to my operations roots, did kind of transformation, turnaround work there in a chief operating officer of one of our regions capacity, mostly serving Medicaid plans for behavioral health in a more traditional carve-out model. And then from there went into a corporate transformation role to help with a lot of the work that we were leading in one of the regions. What I would say is I felt like because of sort of the construct of legacy managed behavioral health organizations outsourced, there were a lot of operational challenges that plagued us from sort of getting to the next generation of innovation that I think I saw health plans need for behavioral health. And so with that as the backdrop, I came to what was actually New Directions 3 years ago. So Lucet is a new brand in the market. If you were looking at the name and thought you were not familiar, well, actually the combination of a company called New Directions Behavioral Health and Tritium. And so New Directions, when I took it over in October 2020, was really an outsourced behavioral health provider for Blue Cross and Blue Shield plans. Because of the nature of the populations we serve, we didn't have as much of the operational complexities. And so we were well positioned to tackle what I thought were the next generation of services we wanted to bring to the health plan market. And where we really focused was on access to care.
Hmm.
I had spent so much time sitting in call centers, listening to members needing access to behavioral health services. So you have someone that's overcome kind of the highest activation energy to pick up the phone and say, I actually need access to help. And what we know from our data is that those people actually are more acute when they're calling and do drive medical expense, right? Because we'll talk about this, I'm sure, the force multiplier that behavioral health is on medical expense. And so we wanted to deliver a new member experience where if you've overcome that activation energy and pick up the phone and say, I need help, you should be able to leave that phone call with help. And so we were looking to be able to direct schedule patients into care, screen triage, connection to high quality care with speed. In order to do that, we didn't have the full capabilities. So we New Directions is a 25, 30-year-old services business. We needed technology to be able to drive that speed and connection to care. And so we ended up acquiring a technology company called Tritium a couple years ago and sort of combined those capabilities together. So, I tell people I'm advising for career advice. In hindsight, you can always tell a perfect linear narrative. Along the way, it wasn't as linear, but a lot of the experiences or sort of I've had along the way really informed as I took over this role a couple years ago.
Yeah, and we love highlighting that, like how and it's one of those things that you can kind of only see in retrospect, how
Exactly.
each stop along your journey really helped you for the next step. But once you've gone through that a couple times, you can kind of apply that math equation to the next thing. You know what I mean? So you can say, okay, even though I can't see into the future, I can pretty much presume based on my past experiences that this current step, even if it's not perfect, it's gonna be, important for whatever's coming next. And you never know where that's gonna go. But so a couple things fascinate me. Why did you decide to go back to school?
Yeah, so the real reason I went back to school was because I moved to Denver for 2 years for a role, and my whole family was back east, and so this was like an easy escape way to kind of get back east. But I think, you know, for me, I really did. This was sort of the times when everyone was starting a company, and
Hmm.
I really wanted to try my hand at that and sort of advance what I was doing in healthcare. But I was definitely too scared to sort of go it alone and say like I'm just going to be a founder and like change my LinkedIn profile one day. And so I did want to kind of be able to be around people that I thought would also have that sort of entrepreneurial aspiration
Hmm.
and be in an environment where I could go test that out in a way that it's like, well, I'm a business school student. I'm not really an entrepreneur. I don't think I ever fully like owned that. And it's probably like not the right DNA to go do, be a founder. And so, that was part of it. I do think there's so much I had sort of a narrow, I mean, I'd worked before I went to business school. Obviously, many of my classmates had worked longer. We had tremendous people with military service and all these different sort of expertise and walks of life that I think also felt like, hey, my leadership style and approach is like just being informed. And now classroom leadership training, as I've now learned, being CEO for 3 years is so different, obviously, from being, on the job where it's like, the poor performer, but they've got something really difficult going on at home with their family that you know about. And like, okay, the calculus is really different than, being in a textbook. But I do think wanted to start to get more broad-based exposure in a classroom setting. And then, be able to apply that later. So those were sort of some of my things. Probably getting back east was like the primary, oh,
Got it.
this is a good excuse, but then very much on that sort of career trajectory side is being helpful.
Interesting. So that's actually the second point that I wanted to kind of double click on, which is you mentioned that you're very risk averse, and that kind of informed a couple steps in your journey from starting something and then shutting it down. And it's so there's and then now it seems like you've possibly found a really really good harmony between being in a company that can be really impactful and you can actually change it. You've done a complete rebrand. You've really kind of reinvented the company. But at the same time, you kind of have that safety net where you're not at it alone. You don't have to start this from scratch and figure out your first hires. And so it sounds like you've kind of found a really, really good opportunity for that. But it's interesting to me that you're so conscious of your personality type, or like you tried a thing and you told me immediately I shut it down because, of the risk. And I had decided that if I couldn't, basically knock it out of the park with the next amount of time, then we're going to shut it down. So I'd love to kind of dig into that a little bit. First of all, how was that? Let's go into the actual scenario. What was that? What was that for you to actually shut down the thing that you spent 2 years on? Like that must have been tremendously difficult.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've honed part of my sort of leadership traits. It's right person, right problem, and always sort of like pretty critically assessing, um, against an opportunity, and also sort of as you build a team and talent. And obviously, this was less relevant in sort of a 3-person team. We had myself, another co-founder, and a CTO. But I do think it was sort of asking like, what is it that we can build from this, and
Mm-hmm.
understanding what am I uniquely capable that I bring to the table? What are the things I don't? And it was like, hey, we could probably build something. We could probably get some VC money here. We're not going to build anything overly substantive. And if I know the things that I love to do, which are, I've said fix and build, but I'm not going to necessarily have the opportunity. So if I'm not sort of creating the career opportunity, and again, that might be sort of my lack of sort of vision and seeing beyond of like what we could build. But I think another sort of hallmark of my leadership is like ruthless prioritization and relentless execution. And I think it was sort of saying, okay, what do we think we can build on the other side? What health plan contracts do we think we can realistically get or not get? And then how do we go from there and sort of make that decision? And so, I think while it was really difficult because we had gotten good traction. We were in accelerators, which again tells you like the market time and bubble. There was like a senior care accelerator in California. But I think that's one of, and I did it when I came to this role too, is we were a very sort of distracted company. I would say when I took over this business, we had like our tentacles in all sorts of different things. And I think the focus on what are you good at, what are you uniquely positioned to be good at, do was sort of right person, right problem. And I think, that was like the hard assessment of, and my co-founder was really helpful in that too, because he and I both sort of saw the world through the same lens. And so again, maybe you should find more disparate sort of thinking if you want to continue on with your company. I don't know what the lesson is here, but I think that was some of it. And again, that flash forward to where I am now, I think, very sort of instructive that I've found, as you've described, something that's the right fit for sort of what I uniquely feel like I excel at around building, sort of saying, how are you going to do a turnaround here? Which is we've done a turnaround into then really launching a new product in a new company. And it is about a certain size and scale that we're at, that, is a 750 person company. That's like my sweet spot because you can still find like really hidden gems within the organization that you're bringing up and pulling into these new and interesting roles. You're also bringing in really top talent from the outside and sort of going and doing that. And all of what I'm describing is like not stuff that you would do in a startup. So I sort of had that recognition. And again, it was sort of reinforced when I then went to another startup and sort of saw, again, like I'm learning a lot of things here, but I like this sort of size
Yeah.
and scale.
Yeah. So just on the practical, was it like a date in your calendar where you were like, if by X, then Z doesn't happen, then, or was it the kind of a conversation leading up to it? Was it like just on the practical? When did you decide to like Kevin O'Leary likes to say, take it behind the barn and shoot it in the head? When did you decide to do that?
Yeah. We were kind of leading up to graduation date and saying like we really did. We had met with a bunch of VCs and we for sure could have gotten seed funding on the business. And I think that was sort of we went through those discussions and we just kind of had like the honest conversation of like, what do we think we can build here? And again, our threshold was like, can we build $100 million business?
Mm-hmm.
And we said no, and so we kind of went from there and said, hey, like, is there anything you could sell off here as far as the tech we had built? And my co-founder did parlay it into like something really interesting and sort of senior care housing analytics. But yeah, it was, we were sitting in like the innovation lab and it was like
You're
the
just
end.
like, all right, it's time.
Yeah.
So I think that's actually really I think it's just really mature, and I'd love to kind of hear maybe some advice that you have, because the idea of getting VC funding, it's almost like a game. Like I've met with a couple founders that they're just like serial founders, and I was telling him of like a possible new opportunity, and he was just telling me like, oh yeah, well, I could just take my technology. I have someone in my in my network who I mentor, and she's trying to start a company. She doesn't know what company to start. So maybe I give her your idea. She could use my technology. We'll spin up another thing, blah, blah, blah. And, we'll get funding. And it's just like this game, and it looks really, really attractive to just like get funding. But then a lot of people fall into that trap. And then like you're seeing now, a ton of companies that are just like completely over leveraged. The funding that they got is nowhere, like their company is nowhere near nearly worth the amount of even funding that they got. And so they're obviously, that's hurting them. But initially for founders, it's like, oh my God, my thing is worth a thing, that someone else would actually put money into it. So how did you steer yourself clear with that mindset that like, just because someone's going to give you money doesn't mean that that's necessarily a healthy approach to starting a company?
Yeah, I mean, I think it does come back to this idea. Like growing up, my mom and actually like grandmother were really into the stock market and investing, and I mean, like we were looking at sort of blue chip, right? You're looking at legacy, and I mean, you can give the examples of the companies that were real like blue chips and now have like cratered, right? But with J&J, like all these companies, and at the end of the day, like you do have to have a product that you can sell somewhere that has margins on it, that creates money and then has profit. And I think we kind of like moved away from that somewhere along the way. I think there's like now this bounce back sort of as you've described, right? And so I think my learning and sort of my advisory, because I get pitched all the time by people either from my alma mater, sort of, hey, like I have this company, I saw you did this thing. I would say funding and press are not a proxy for success. And if you're going to do something in healthcare, don't test it in the Boston ecosystem. It's like not a proxy for the rest of the U.S. Like go find a health system in the Midwest and go test it there.
Okay.
But I think it is this idea of, like I said before, I do think most businesses in healthcare, you do have to look at the enterprise, right? So you've got to figure out who's going to be your buyer. There's always the triangle of where does the value accrue relative to the payer, right? That there's been, many blogs and things written on. But at the end of the day, there should be a clear path that like, if we achieve some sort of size and scale, like we're going to make money on doing this thing and it's going to contribute sort of EBITDA positive. And so, I think like I couldn't really see, I don't see a line of sight to that, even in businesses that's now are still getting, crazy valuations. Like to me, valuation is like a number on a paper. There's nothing really substantively there. Like I would like to build a business that's going to trade for a certain amount that's actually cash and hard cash in the bank. And so I think being sort of informed by that, like growing up, like not in that sort of, techie fluff. And to be fair, like my mom was one of the first NVIDIA investors but she was like, there's going to be computer vision for cars that I think there's going to be a market for that. And like, whatever they've gone and done, incredible other things, but still this idea that like, there's going to be a buyer willingness to pay, it's going to then contribute to bottom line. I think that informs a lot of, maybe it's not even so much risk aversion as it's like, is there going to be a profitable business to be had here? And, it's something that now, like we are in a profit driven environment in the, company that I run, it's not off of, top line valuation and multiples. And I like that because I actually think in this environment, it's actually great. Like I've talked recently to somebody that said your company has to have a clinical right to exist in healthcare. And I think, the beauty of being profitable, but having a clinical right to exist is that we're at the perfect intersection of margin and mission. I think people think about the mission side always like, oh, VC backed always has like better mission than, PE backed, like margin and mission are in conflict. That's part of why I love this company. And like, we'll continue to want to grow and make this into this special place because the more members we connect to care, the better we do financially.
Right.
And so I think once you can also get over kind of that conflict is like something that I sought out and is actually not that easy to find. And I think why there's so much talent attracted to VC backed and kind of taking funding because it's inherently feeling like you're doing better for the system. But I think that's where you have to recognize the constraints of the system in terms of the buyers and what's actually going to be a solution that works for health plan, health system, employer, sort of whatever poison you're picking on the enterprise side.
Yeah. Yeah. So it sounds like your advice to, young companies, because the thing is, I think the reason why it looks so shiny is because it also generates so much attention and it gives like this like stamp of approval and validity to whatever you're doing. And so I think a lot of companies, even if they don't need it necessarily, but they're going to try to go after some sort of funding because it's going to generate a ton of press and media. Sounds like your advice is don't get distracted by that and focus on value.
Yes. Focus on value, focus on where is going to be that willingness to pay. Are you, if it's health plan, right? Are you driving savings? If it's, health system, it's more helpful to drive revenue these days. I mean, cost savings is good too. It's like, what are you actually your value to the system that you're going to drive? And is that substantive enough? And then I think you have to get into the whole conversation of, are you a feature, platform, product, those types of things. Right. And, to really build something of scale, which again, if that's your goal, there's other people that's like not their goal. So I don't want to apply my own, what
Right.
I wanted to do to other people. And so for them, they're going to continue to spun up great ideas. And that's probably great for the innovation sort of cycle in the country.
Right, right. All right. Before we get to what Lucid actually does,
Yeah.
last question on this because it's very interesting to me. I think that there's this like perceived binary in the business world where like if I'm a leader, I must be a founder, I must be I must be an entrepreneur, and that term has been so like romanticized where it's like, and it's also equally become so meaningless because you have all these incredible entrepreneurs, and the proof that they're an entrepreneur is that they're the CEO, and the proof that they're the CEO is the landing page that they created for $9.99 on Wix. So it's like, but look at me. And so I've said this a lot that like, because like a lot of young kids are like, oh, if I'm not starting my own company, then what am I doing? And I've always thought that there's tremendous value in even if you are, let's assume you are an entrepreneur, right? But there's still tremendous value in you just like going to get a job that's a growth job. There's a lot of room for growth, and you're not going to be stocking shelves in the supermarket, but like go get a job, understand a market. And the way I like to think about it is it's almost like there's two types of comedians, right? There's a comedian that can write a funny joke, right? And so they got to sit there with a pen and paper. They got to think, I got to think of a joke. I got to think of a joke. And then you have some actually hilarious humans that they just go around life with this comedic lens on, and whatever they see, they're going to see comedy in it, right? And I feel like a lot of that's like with entrepreneurialism. If you find yourself sitting in a basement racking your head about like, how do I start a company? Like maybe that's not the best approach. Maybe go just do stuff. And at some point, if you actually are entrepreneurial, you will see opportunity and you'll go and create something. That's kind of off on a tangent. What was interesting to me about you is that you seem to be super comfortable with the fact that it's not a negative thing that you shut your company down and now you're the CEO of a massive, amazing company. Like that's not at all a negative thing. That was that's your purpose, and that's the outcome that was absolutely necessary for you. And so did you have any kind of trouble coming to terms with that? And what kind of advice would you give? And now that you are like, no, this is like, you're absolutely owning it. What kind of advice would you give to young people that maybe have that conflict?
Yeah, I mean, I think I definitely probably did at the time. And this is what I was saying. I think as you look back, you can sort of more linearly sort of tell this story. And I think there were so many learnings from that. I mean, we were, with our EDU address, like sending out emails to palliative care directors at hospitals, and like everyone was taking our meeting, and I learned an incredible amount. Right, there were all these things. Like I was doing a pilot at a geriatric emergency department in
Wow.
Paterson, New Jersey, like riding the train down, and we were going to be post discharge instructions, and we had this amazing ER physician that like loved what we were doing and was like so excited about it and piloting it. And like little did we were like, we had no idea, we were going to have to go through like a HIPAA review and technology review and all these things to like actually get a contract signed with like a legitimate institution. And so,
Right.
I mean, I learned a tremendous amount. So I really think like there is no shame. I think the problem is like going too long if you realize like the idea doesn't have legs. And then more importantly, if you start to raise funding and you're hiring teams of people and you don't, as the CEO or founder, have a clear line of sight to how is this business going to make money eventually. Because I think that the times were so frothy that like it was kicking the can down the road. Like it's okay if you don't have unit economics. I think the markets have changed such that they're not backing those anymore. But that's when you have a leadership responsibility to say, if I'm going to be hiring and bringing on employees, and we even felt that with our CTO, is like, are we going to be able to deliver a career for him if he's going to make a choice to join us?
Yeah.
So I think, no shame from my perspective in doing that. It's a great learning opportunity. I think it's just knowing when like the right time is. And it's really easy. Actually, when I did it, it's much harder. I think as you start to take money, scale up a little bit, it feels like a much more, I think that's where we have this like empty vessel of companies that are sort of walking around as like empty, valuation and warehouses that like now it's like and there's like these zombies out there right now.
Yeah.
That's so much harder to do. I don't know if I would have had like stomach and fortitude. It was actually easier to do it when we did it before we like decided to hire anybody and do anything. So that's what I would just say is like, we kind of, in my mind, took the easy choice. And I think it's easy in like retrospect to explain that. Definitely felt like didn't want to change the LinkedIn at the time of like, well, I was the founder and CEO, and whatever, co-founder of this thing, and now I'm not. But I think, that's what I would just say about it. So it's like have an honest conversation about what are you trying to build? What are you trying to do? Again, I think it's much harder for some of these companies that are, many, many rounds in and like significant number of employees and don't have a clear path to profitability.
Yeah. Yeah. And you definitely get to see it in today's market where
Yeah.
It's not always going to be what was like the peak 2021, 2022.
Yeah.
We're not always going to be there. So, all right. So let's dig in a little bit more into Lucid. So, why was it exciting to you as an opportunity before? Well, it wasn't Lucid then. Why was that exciting to you?
Yeah, so I think we had the hallmarks at New Directions of really great sort of clinical programs that we just weren't kind of capitalizing on at scale. But I felt like we had all the building blocks with kind of our teams and our people, particularly on the clinical side and sort of services side, to be able to go execute or sort of make a pivot and execute something that I thought would be really meaningful for health plans. And so, that's what was when I saw sort of the building blocks and sort of saw, hey, our sort of three pillars of our transformation work were, getting the company into a better sort of operational and financial place, launching a new product into the market, and then figuring out kind of growth beyond our current segments, because that really hadn't been the directive of the business historically. And so I really saw sort of all the building blocks there. I did kind of turn 100% of my management team to really get new blood and leadership into the organization to really execute that charter. I'm definitely one of those believers that like you got to figure out who's on the bus and off, and the people that you don't want on, get them off quickly. Don't
Okay.
kind of linger
So
with
it's like,
that.
let's dig into that. How did you, because that's really important, I think. What's your methodology for determining that?
Yeah. So again, I think it's looking at right person, right problem. Like, what are we going to go tackle? What are the things that this person needs to kind of have and skills and go do? And then I think it's actually having like a very honest dialogue with that person around, hey, like my expectation is we're going to be really good at these things. Like we're going to drive a growth agenda that's going to require these things. Like, is that something you want to be in or out for? I'm not like a, hey, just like firing squad person,
Yeah.
right? I'm a honest dialogue. These are the expectations. Kind of, do you want in or out on that? I think that's sort of the fair, place to be at. There's a really great book called First 90 Days. I think it's an HBR book, and just sort of it helps you figure out how to evaluate your people that you immediately want to exit, your people that you want to watch and wait, and you have to communicate to them what are you watching and waiting for, and your people that you want to assure keep, right? And being able to quickly diagnose, okay, the critical path items here are doing an ops turnaround, or the critical path is we need to drive sales growth, or what are the things you need to do, and do you have the right people in the right seats, and can you tolerate if you have the wrong person, what function are they in, and can you tolerate that there? So like that's the assessment that I go through and sort of would recommend. But you can't early enough establish the right team, because that sort of cascades everything from there. And especially if you're trying to drive a new culture, like you are what you tolerate, right? And
Right.
so it's both you are what you tolerate and you are what you sort of leave in place and reward, right? And so if you're going to try to drive the scale of change that we were trying to drive, we really kind of had to do that shift early out of the gate, and it was a massive signal to the organization. And it's been a really significant turnaround. We probably turned like close to 50 to 60% of the organization in a 3-year period, and done almost a $30 million kind of EBITDA turnaround. So really significant transformation for the organization, and that was sort of the starting point. But I think from there, we really felt like we could again go out to the market and identify what do we think our customers. We wanted to become customer centric. It was not something we had been done earlier in the organization, because we were owned by plans that are sort of required to give us their business,
Right.
and that just doesn't breed a certain
Yeah.
market facing and kind of
earn it.
activity. Exactly. And so we really wanted to kind of pivot that, create a customer success organization, really talk about what does it mean to be market facing, and develop some of those capabilities. And that's where we had the benefit of also being able to look out and say, what do we think the next capabilities that we want to build are. We landed on this access to care operating system, found this really great company called Tritium that was delivering a lot of the types of services that we wanted to do at scale at Kaiser. And so we ended up purchasing them, deploying them in our Florida Blue account, and kind of getting to where we are now in the market with our Navigate Connect product that we are, very aggressively selling to other health plans across the country.
What's Navigate Connect?
Yep. So Navigate Connect encompasses screening, triaging, scheduling members directly into care, and the way that, and high quality care with speed. So we have kind of both the quality and the speed pieces. The way that we do that is we are bringing providers onto our Lucet platform. We create what's called a smart network stack for behavioral health, where we bring local bricks and mortar, so the provider network that already exists with a health plan. We engage those providers onto the platform. We can also integrate with practice management systems downstream to get kind of the solo practitioners onto the platform as well. And then we bring on some of the newer tech backed, some of your listeners may be familiar with all of kind of the new entrants in the behavioral health space that are kind of tech enabled capabilities around specific conditions, mostly VC backed, and they sit on the other side of the platform. And then also the kind of large roll up PE publicly traded outpatient providers. And so that stack allows us to get members kind of reliably, repeatedly connected into care. And so when health plans purchase that Navigate Connect product, they are able to directly schedule their members into care. You can do it through the kind of Lucet side where we have our care navigators that are enabled on the platform and they're doing that screening, triage, and scheduling. Or you can do it within your call center at a health plan, and then we're able to deliver that, and then we push it out into other care channels. So my thesis on behavioral is, if you look at utilization within a health plan today, it sits, somewhere in the low teens for a good health plan, somewhere in the low single digits if they're not doing a lot of work on behavioral. I think it should sit up somewhere between 20 to 30%, meaning 20 to 30% of members should have a behavioral health kind of care provided to them in some form or fashion. I think what we're seeing right now is there's like an uptick in outpatient utilization that doesn't match to the people that do drive medical expense that need behavioral health care. I think we're still not getting to the people that drive medical expense that need behavioral health care co-occurring. And we see this in the data. If you look at the medical diagnoses and then BH diagnoses or claims against them within a 90-day period. And so our whole goal for working with a health plan with Navigate Connect is to drive up BH utilization. Concept that's like not traditionally how people thought about behavioral health, right? It was around managing care, managing spend. We say quite the opposite. You need to drive as much behavioral health care as possible that's going to be beneficial to drive down medical expense.
So you look at the entire space as like a preventive measure that's going to drive down costs.
Yeah, my ideal state is anybody newly diagnosed with a chronic disease, anybody that goes and has a hip knee replacement, anxiety and depression, manifest themselves when you're thinking about, oh, is my quality of life going to change? Am I going to be able to, do less tennis game, whatever it is with my grandchild, whatever it is. I think we could be infusing behavioral health there and have significant spend reductions on the medical side. And so our goal is anywhere, everywhere. BH should be infused. Again, we're not talking about kind of high cost, long-term treatment. We're talking about sort of lightweight screening and getting wraparound care. But I think I know we talk about it a lot more now, but there's not nearly the degree of sort of pervasive BH utilization that we believe needs to happen.
And so correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like at the end of the day, the behavioral health vertical and regular, so to speak, healthcare vertical are kind of disconnected from a reimbursement and incentive standpoint. So why would you be incentivized, besides for trying to be a good person, why would you be incentivized on a practical level to try to lower costs on the other side?
Yeah, so we are working, with health plans, they do have an incentive, right? If you're looking at total medical expense, you're right, though. That is kind of the challenge with the conversation, is carving up the share of dollar.
Yeah.
And it actually gets more complicated now because you have, we see this as an opportunity, but you have different subcapitated players in particular conditions. So for example, you have kidney disease, you have cardiac, you have cancer, you have, other conditions that are being sort of subcapped out. In theory, people don't operate in a vacuum. They don't only have one of those conditions. So if you're talking about cutting up the share of dollar, you have primary care, risk, fully capitated primary care. If you're thinking about kind of carving up the share of dollar, it's really hard. BH is an underlying force multiplier on all of those conditions. So, for us, we're playing the long game, that we have the chassis that's going to allow members to get connected to high quality care, for behavioral with speed. And you need to be infusing it in all those places. I agree with you, though. We've not yet fully figured out kind of the business model on that.
Draw the line.
But we believe that as those players, particularly who do bear risk, get through risk adjustment top line, it's going to be a game on medical expense, and you for sure need to be infusing BH there. The same thing is true for health plans for kind of portions of their population as well. But we are, focused on those people that drive medical expense. We'll obviously navigate, the person that needs behavioral health care that doesn't drive medical spend into care. But I think the missed opportunity right now is sort of the untreated and undertreated that we look at within the population. And I do agree there needs to be evolution there, but I think some of it has already started in the form of people taking on, risk for these populations.
Yep.
And so there is just a business model question around getting PH embedded.
Yeah. Yeah. No, great answer. So moving into the future, what's your vision for Lucet, and what do you want to accomplish?
Yeah, so we're on our growth. Our third pillar was sort of growth, so we are very aggressive on the growth side. So if you have any health plan people listening and they'd like our Navigate Connect product, no, I'm just kidding. But it's very much focused on growth, and then the other piece of it is what I just described to you, which is figuring out sort of what are all the care settings where people are presenting and needing access to behavioral health services, and how are we embedding ourselves. To me, if you have a person on the phone in your clinic presenting somewhere for care, that is the moment in time when you've got to strike. And it doesn't matter whether it's a BH setting or a medical setting, that's your moment in time where you've got to engage that person and get them connected. So we're always thinking about sort of channel expansion. And then I think we really do want to answer this question around, all the places where people are sort of taking on risk for different conditions, where BH is the force multiplier. We believe like Lucid has, a major role to play in sort of being that underlying capability around behavioral. And so we'll be continuing to push forward. And I think that'll emerge, over a longer time horizon than, obviously our focus on health plan growth in the near term.
Incredible. Shaina, it's so nice to sit with you. You very quickly, this was like, 20 minutes ago, but you very quickly ran through like 10 really, really incredible principles of leadership that I thought were extremely well said and informed. Have you written a book yet, or is that next?
No, I have the notes in the Gmail folder. It's for the later in life. But I definitely I love kind of leadership books and sort of the applicability. I read a great book called Think Like a Rocket Scientist. If you haven't read that one, I would recommend that one, where you actually plan that the rocket ship explodes.
Oh,
and you figure out all the things that would have happened. And so you do this pre-mortem on a project. Big fan of that. So I have to come up with novel concepts when I write a book, because there's amazing business books out there. But
I don't know. Well, that's true. But I've read quite a few. But you know what I find, when something is just clearly articulated and it makes sense and it's not very esoteric, and the leadership principle and it's based on your real life experience, and you're not just saying a bunch of ideas. You're not college professoring it. You're actually saying real things. That speaks to people, and I think that a lot of what you said here was tremendous. So, how can people find you, and who should be finding you?
Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn. And, most importantly, we want our health plans who want to access our services. No, always be pitching, right? My chief commercial officer would be happy. But no, LinkedIn, my husband makes fun of me that LinkedIn is my social media of choice. Yeah. He's like, other people have other things, but LinkedIn. But that's the best place to find me. But I'm always open to networking, talking to people. I do love mentoring. And so always happy to opine on things. Always one person's opinion, but happy to do that. And then hopefully if people are at conferences, I'm, out on the road. So my first week, I think, now on the road in like 3 months.
Wow. So congratulations.
Yeah, really, really appreciate you having me on. Love the podcast you do, Mendel. So thanks so much.
Thank you, Shaina. Thank you so much for spending time with us today.